Hello, and welcome to an adventure like no other. Far more than what you have known, there is something far more to be known than you can ever know. And it is all about you, the real you, your real awareness with your intuitive senses. You were never taught that the real you, your real awareness, is operating 5 bodies in cause and effect, restricting creation. You have been taught to think that you are only a one-dimensional human person, with a mind and emotions, and with a very short lifespan on this planet Earth. More than what your mind can grasp is your intuitive senses that can be opened to see beyond all your restrictions. You have always had an opening to see beyond what you have known, and this has been purposely kept from you, and this is where you have heard rumors and stories about your nightly dreams. Your so-called dreams is your opening to your intuitive senses that will allow you, the personal you, to excel beyond what you have previously known. Everyone has intuitive senses, and very few people take advantage of what is possible by recognizing something more than their mind can understand. Creation has its place for all of us, and then there is all life, which is far more than anything than what can become with creation. Everything we experience is necessary for us to survive with whatever we choose and decide our life to be. New Kevin Smith is the great witness to something more than what can be taught and learned in any school. It can be so that when anyone first listens to Kevin's intuitive side experiences, also known as real side experiences, from what their personal mind has known, Kevin's manner of expression will at first be rather different to comprehend. This is where this introduction and reading the new books and Facebook groups will help. Have fun deciding. DUANE the Great Writer and Seer.
As I have revealed in previous real side experiences over the years, and what by now must be blatantly obvious to anyone paying attention to physical level developments, is the unfolding agenda in regards to humanity. Since humanity's genetically engineered inception, so have they been subject to suppression and control by the hand of those that had created the species, the reptilians. The defining principle of creation dictating that nothing can an individual or species experience, absent of agreement that it can be so, for any situation to befall a species, so the ideas effecting such must be present and installed in consciousness. That humanity were able to be genetically interfered with and remoulded as a slave race reveals this agreement was secured all the way back to the initial ape species that humanity originally were. A consciousness-embedded agreement that has been maintained to the present day, hence the ability of the Dark Force reptilians to retain their dominance over humanity. A foundation then of control that defines the experience that is human, but should a dominating species desire to escalate and advance their agenda as it pertains to their enslaved species, in regards to humanity, so these are additional ideas that must be implanted within the overall collective human consciousness. The dark forces are nothing but ingenious where idea installation is concerned, rather than directly presenting ideas for agreement, so they rather filter them in through the back door, through subliminal subconscious application. And as ideas are rarely as they appear on the surface, laced with additional idea baggage and intentionality, much like a data file embedded with an insidious computer debilitating virus, so adept are the reptilians at ensuring their agenda for humanity can move forwards with the successful and generally technologically based application of the ideas that are then the causality of the effects desired. As of relatively recent moments, so the dark forces have adjusted their direction, that preferable is it from their perspective for humanity to now suffer extreme levels of depopulation, perhaps even to the extent of complete genocide, or in the very least mass robotization, as the ultimate expression of control, the usurping of each individual's ability to self-decide, to generate ideas via the body-vehicle mechanics. And I have been revealing the various options available to the controllers as shown to me on the real side, options made possible via the successful installation of idea agreements that permit the array of scenarios to be as potentialities. Which of the viable options that comes to fruition, always dependent on the idea held to in greatest prominence, that it is effected as a physical level happenstance, despite every idea of a consciousness in reality being in effect now in actuality. The only recourse available to the human species is to in some way alter their collective consciousness, that the ideas of an apocalyptic depopulation nature are extracted, or alternative ideas more beneficial are embraced. Rather unlikely, it must be said, as effectively the consciousness that is the human experience is virtually under complete lockdown and orchestrated as to its design by the darker forces. The most feasible option, then, is to bypass the consciousness altogether. That although there are real-side operations in place, where beneficial human consciousness reformatting are being attempted, should one step into the true reality of their real awareness, they no longer are subject to however the consciousness has been programmed and liberated then from its continuous effect, achievable via intent, as everything stems from intent placement, and where should the real intent, that of all is recognition, be embraced, established through the new you song connection, this begins a process of a consciousness dissociation, where the consciousness and its restricting idea-laden construct is bypassed. Rather unrealistic that this can be so for an entire enslaved species, although not beyond the realms of possibility, but more so on an individual person-by-person basis, where should the control that is a human consciousness be sidestepped, no longer is the individual subject to the effects, and where options and opportunity for alternative experience be made available. Over the years, I have revealed the forms these options may take, everything from planetary extractions to complete species interventions, the Alien Armada event still on the table as an example, to the extent even of alternative simulators being made available. As I mentioned, as the deciders of all we experience, any alternative possibility will be countermanded by ideas held to that negate their beneficial impact. If I hold to the idea agreement as to my enslaved circumstances, this will be my continued experiential effect, and where the attempted interventions will be unable to feature or take root. A situation then, as I mentioned, where it is more so on an individual basis that these alternative options can be made available and embraced in conjunction and tandem with the releasing of the restricting dark force controller consciousness installed ideas, dictating the success where such interventions are concerned. For indeed, in a recent array of real-side experiences, so was the theme leaning toward individual planetary extraction, courtesy of agreeable aliens and their associated spacecraft, made possible with the relinquishing of agreements, that would have had one bound to controller agenda circumstances that the vast majority of humanity are very likely self-resigned to have to endure. In this real side experience, so would be presented a play on this theme, that of a possible extraction option becoming available. For made apparent to me would be how certain buildings across the various countries of the globe would in actuality be spacecraft in their own right, capable of departing the planet and traversing the stars, masquerading as structures of varying convenience, stores and such like, by which hand such was brought into a manifestation wasn't revealed, but a situation either the dark forces were oblivious of, or known to them but beyond their ability to interfere with or prevent. Everything based on agreement, as I said, and where, if a creation is fashioned via a consciousness, absent of idea agreements, allowing the sabotaging, interceding of others, so such creations are beyond the ability of others to interfere with or prevent as to their function or purpose. That should circumstances continue to deteriorate to the extent that there is little prudence to be had by remaining on the earth, for those who have embraced their awareness processes, and where to be retained in progressively constricting affairs makes no sense, at a pivotal, pre-decided and designated moment will these various earth-based buildings and structures become activated, and serve as potential rescue vehicles for the secure transportation of such individuals beyond the prison planet that is the Earth to alternative positions creationally. For indeed this would take place now in this real side experience, as I would receive multiple views of the various and easily accessible buildings, which, as I said, had been posing as varying assorted structures of convenience, becoming activated and presenting as extraction options for those who were in an awareness progressed position to embrace such an opportunity. Generally, those to be taking advantage of these space arcs were oblivious that such an option was available, and indeed necessary was it for they to be delivered to these spacecraft, courtesy of certain select individuals tasked with ensuring their safe passage to these buildings, that those providing safe escort were positioned globally to facilitate the soon-to-be extracted humans that were scattered throughout the countries of the world. For indeed, I would find myself in such a position, rounding up those that had been identified in my particular country as extraction candidates, and delivering them to a building that on the surface presented as a vast shopping mall, but in reality was a large space vessel. Presumably then, at a key and pre-designated moment, will not only the identities of those to be extracted, but their location and that of the building, craft, that is to transport them become known to those tasked with such an operation. One of the individuals I would locate would be a blind man, and after my engaging with him, so would he recollect real side experiences he had received, hinting at such a possibility, and thus the situation he now was in was one he had been prepared for and willingly would proceed to embrace. As I escorted him to the vast mall, his sight would be restored, perhaps a symbolic or maybe a literal effect of the shaking off of the final restricting agreements, which removed him more so into a real awareness standing, facilitating the actuality of this planetary extrication opportunity. He was a little confused as to where he should proceed once within the mall, and I would assure him that he would be taken care of and orientated as to the procedure involved in what was shortly to be a departure from the planet, as though other individuals were placed to assist within them all in full knowledge of what was set to take place. Although the actual departure I would not bear witness to, one would assume them all to either be semi-illusory as to its appearance, and thus be restored to its actual spacecraft form, or that perhaps a certain section of it would physically detach and present as the vessel. Either way, impressions provided assurances this would take place, and that the man and all others delivered to them all, and indeed to similar structures globally, would shortly be embarking on quite the adventure indeed. Interestingly, I had the strong realization and recollection of having performed this assignment, that of gathering the human passengers, many times before. In reality, every idea potentiality is present in the isness now of the real awareness reality, so from that perspective everything would then be familiar, despite the personal self only perhaps now receiving the real side afforded view of it. The impression was more that I had been practicing for this event, as though reinserting myself into the idea effect of it continuously, to ensure its ever more refined execution, like playing the same stage in a computer game over and over. That although this had been taking place on the real side, only now was my personal self made aware of it, and the recollection of having partaken of continued practice regarding it. Perhaps necessary was it to more so refine my own intent and focus, that I could execute such an assignment smoothly, should indeed such a scenario come to pass on the physical level. For in this instance and real side experience, where the blind man was one of those I was tasked to assist, so I had the impression of not only performing this duty many times previously, but that on this occasion I was somewhat delayed, for whatever reason, somewhat racing against the clock, so to speak, and had a narrow time window to complete my locating of those that were to be shepherded into them all. For indeed I would be constantly liaising with an individual possessing of extreme awareness, a female, as though updating her on my progress, and engaging that interspersed each of my individual human acquiring missions. But this interaction, with who very likely was a real guide, would occur in a position that was somewhat aside from what was taking place as a physical level future view, as though from a dimension removed from it, but simultaneously accessed. We all are multi-dimensional, and operating throughout creation through our various body vehicles as we do. That for whatever reason, my orientation of intent and focus in this particular real side view, pertaining to this potential physical level occurrence, had me somewhat delayed, but still within my ability to execute, despite the sense of having to rush. Interestingly, in conjunction with what was being revealed and unfolding here, was my construction of a series of what can best be described as data streams of information regarding the various details of this extraction operation. These data streams I would continue to refine, and the impression of them being made available to those who were to be the recipient of this intervention and to benefit from planetary relocation, as though they were afforded on the real side, and where their personal selves, although unconscious of them, were still the recipient of the details thus contained. hence their recognition of the situation as it became their experience, where I entered their midst, and they were able to recall their respective real side experiences in regards to a case of being prepared then on the unseen dimensions of life. There the experience and view would conclude. As I mentioned, this would present as a potential contingency option should conditions continue to deteriorate to the point of it becoming nonsensical to remain Earth operating. Spacecraft already created and present throughout the countries of the world designed for this purpose, planetary relocation, but where, as always must be the case, it falls on each individual to ultimately decide their fate and experience. We each are, individually and a species collectively, the architects of our circumstances, and it will be interesting to see what comes of this option, or what further details I may receive in regards to it.